Velthar stood in the observation deck of the Coalition Council Station and watched the stars. His four eyes blinked slowly, one pair after another, as he processed the data streaming across his vision plate. The numbers were not good. They were never good when the Ravix returned. He turned his long head toward the council chamber. Inside, representatives from 47 species argued about survival. Velthar had attended these meetings for 30 years. He knew how they would end. Math did not lie. Logic did not fail. The Ravix swarm would destroy 19 star systems before the Coalition could stop them. 19 systems meant 43 billion lives. The door opened. A human walked in. Velthar studied the creature with professional interest. Humans had joined the Coalition only 80 years ago. They were the youngest species in the Alliance, barely past their own planet's wars. This one wore a military uniform covered in symbols Velthar did not recognize. The human was tall for his species, with dark hair and darker eyes. His name tag read, Captain Quan. Ambassador Velthar? The human asked. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. Yes. Velthar's translator chip converted his clicking sounds into human language. You are the military observer? That's right. I'm here to coordinate human fleet deployment. Quan looked around the observation deck. Beautiful view. Velthar found this comment strange. The view was adequate. Stars were stars. The council is about to announce the evacuation plan. You should review the tactical data. Quan pulled out a small device and read through the information. Velthar watched the human's face carefully. His species had studied human expressions for decades. They were fascinating in their irrationality. Humans broadcast their emotions through facial movements, vocal tones, and body positions. It made them terrible at negotiation, but excellent at reading each other. Right now, Quan's face showed what humans called concern. His eyebrows pulled together. His mouth pressed into a thin line. These numbers say we're abandoning the outer colonies, Quan said. Correct. The Grand Tactician has calculated the optimal survival strategy. We evacuate the 19 vulnerable systems. We establish a defensive line at the threshold. We preserve the core worlds and 78% of the Coalition population. What about the other 22%? Velthar tilted his head. Acceptable losses. The math is clear, Captain. We cannot save everyone. We can save most. Logic demands we choose the path with the highest survival rate. Quan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Velthar would remember for the rest of his life. We don't do math like that. Inside the council chamber, the Grand Tactician presented the evacuation plan. She was Kixian, like Velthar, with the same four eyes and the same logical mind. She displayed the holograms showing fleet movements, defensive positions, and projected casualties. Everything was calculated to 3 decimal places. The Ravix swarm consists of approximately 8,000 capital ships and 2 million fighter craft, she explained. They move through space by consuming stellar matter. They cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be stopped. They can only be avoided or destroyed at great cost. The council members listened quietly. Most species present had evolved past emotional responses to danger. They understood probability. They accepted mathematical reality. Then the human delegation stood up. There were 5 of them. Captain Quan led them. Behind him stood Commander He, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Admiral Te, an older man with gray hair and scars on his hands. General Wu, who commanded the human ground forces. And a young lieutenant named Sol, who looked barely old enough to serve. We have reviewed the evacuation plan, Quan said. With respect to the Grand Tactician, humans will not be participating in the retreat. The chamber went silent. Captain Quan, the Grand Tactician said carefully, perhaps you did not understand. This is not a request. This is the optimal survival strategy for the Coalition. All member species must comply. We understand perfectly, Commander He said. Her voice was cold. You're planning to abandon 19 systems. That's 43 billion people. Men, women, children. You're going to leave them to die. We are saving 78%, the Grand Tactician replied. That is logical. Admiral Tay stepped forward. Then your logic is wrong. Velthar watched this exchange with growing confusion. Humans were arguing against mathematics. They were rejecting probability. This was like arguing against gravity or denying the speed of light. General Wu spoke next. The human fleet will deploy to the outer colonies. We will establish defensive positions. We will buy time for evacuation. And we will not retreat until every civilian is extracted. That is impossible, the Grand Tactician said. Our calculations show— We know what your calculations show, Quan interrupted. We've seen them. But here's what you're missing. Your math only works if everyone follows it. We're not going to follow it. The Grand Tactician's translator chip made an unusual sound. Velthar recognized it as the electronic equivalent of confusion. You are choosing certain death over probable survival, she said. Lieutenant Saul spoke for the first time. Her voice was young but steady. We're choosing to protect people over protecting numbers. There's a difference. The council erupted in debate. Some species supported the human position with words but not actions. Others argued that emotion was overruling reason. The Grand Tactician demanded the humans comply with coalition strategy. Admiral Tay raised his voice. The human vote is final. We're deploying to the outer colonies. Any coalition forces that want to join us are welcome. Any that want to retreat can do so. We'll hold the line either way. That night, Velthar filed his initial report on human military doctrine. He had been assigned to observe the humans and document their inevitable failure. The coalition needed proof that emotional species could not survive modern warfare. Velthar's observations would provide that proof. He wrote, Humans demonstrate primitive attachment to individual lives over collective survival. They reject mathematical probability in favor of emotional response. They prioritize sentiment over strategy. This observer predicts catastrophic casualties within the first engagement. Recommendation: document their failures for future species integration protocols. He sent the report and prepared his equipment. The coalition had given him a personal shuttle and embedded him with the human fleet. He would watch them die. He would record it. He would prove that evolution meant leaving emotions behind. 3 days later, the human fleet departed for the outer colonies. Velthar went with them. Captain Quan assigned him quarters on the flagship and gave him full access to command meetings. Why are you letting me observe everything? Velthar asked. Quan smiled. It was a strange expression, showing teeth. Because you're going to write about this someday. When you do, I want you to get the story right. There will be no story, Velthar said. Only casualty reports. Maybe, Quan said. But maybe you'll be surprised. Velthar did not believe in surprises. He believed in math. And the math said the humans would die. The Ravik swarm was coming. The humans were waiting. And Velthar was watching. He did not know yet that everything he believed about evolution, about logic, about survival, was about to change. He did not know that seeing humans fight would make him see that his entire species was hopeless. But he would learn. The Raviks came like a storm of metal and hunger. Velthar watched from the observation deck of Quan's flagship as the enemy appeared on the sensors. 8,000 ships, just as predicted. They moved in perfect formation, consuming everything in their path. Behind them, 3 star systems were already dark, dead, empty. All ships. Battle stations, Quan's voice echoed through the comm system. Remember the plan. Protect the evacuation transports, no matter what. Commander Hay stood at the tactical station, her fingers moving across the controls. Civilian ships are loading now. Estimated evacuation time, 4 hours. 4 hours, Velthar calculated quickly. The Raviks would arrive in 2 hours and 17 minutes. The math was simple. The humans needed to hold for twice as long as probability allowed. They will overrun our position, Velthar said to Quan. You should begin retreat procedures now. Quan did not look away from the viewport. We're not leaving. That is not logic. That is suicide. Maybe. Quan's jaw tightened. But those are our people down there. Human, Kixian, Vrelian, doesn't matter. They're counting on us. So we hold. The Ravik swarm grew larger on the screens. Velthar had studied them for years. They were efficient. They were ruthless. They had destroyed civilizations older than most current coalition species. They did not stop. They did not negotiate. They consumed. The human fleet positioned itself between the swarm and the colony worlds. 63 ships against 8,000. Velthar had seen better odds in theoretical extinction scenarios. Incoming, High announced. Contact in 30 seconds. Velthar watched the human crew prepare for battle. They moved with purpose, but he noticed something strange. Their faces showed fear. Their hands trembled slightly. Their breathing patterns changed. These were all signs of emotional distress. In Kixian forces, such reactions would be considered failures. Emotions interfered with optimal performance, but the humans did not try to suppress their fear. They simply kept working through it. All ships, this is Admiral Tay, the voice came over the fleet channel. I won't lie to you. The odds are bad. The enemy is strong. Some of us won't make it home. But every second we hold is another family saved, another life preserved. That's what we're fighting for. Not glory, not victory. Just giving people time to run. Make your shots count. Make your sacrifices matter. And remember, we're human. We don't know when to quit. The Raviks opened fire. Space lit up with energy weapons and explosive shells. The human ships scattered, breaking formation in ways that violated every tactical doctrine Velthar knew. They should maintain defensive positioning. Instead, they flew in unpredictable patterns, making themselves harder to hit but also harder to support. This is chaos, Velthar said. You have abandoned all formation integrity. Formations are predictable, Hay replied without looking up. Predictable gets you killed. We're making them work for every shot. The battle became a storm of violence. Velthar watched his screens as human ships took damage that should have forced their retreat. But they did not retreat. A destroyer lost half its hull and kept firing. A cruiser with dead engines used maneuvering thrusters to ram a Ravik's capital ship, destroying both vessels. Ship down, Hay reported. The destroyer Incheon is gone. Captain Minho reported engine failure 10 seconds before impact. He aimed for their command vessel. Quan's face showed pain, but his voice stayed steady. Mark him for honors. Continue the fight. Velthar recorded everything. This was exactly what he expected. Emotional humans making emotional sacrifices, throwing away lives for no strategic gain. Except, he checked his calculations again. The Ravik's advance had slowed. Not much, but measurably. The human ships were not fighting to win. They were fighting to delay. Every destroyed human vessel had taken multiple Ravik ships with it. Every damaged human ship had created debris fields that forced the swarm to adjust course. Evacuation at 60%, High announced. 2 hours 20 minutes remaining. The battle continued. Velthar watched a frigate commanded by Lieutenant Sol intercept a wing of Ravik's fighters heading for the evacuation transports. Her ship was small, lightly armed, designed for reconnaissance. She should have withdrawn. Instead, Sol flew directly at the fighters. Her voice came over the comm channel, clear and calm. All evacuation ships, adjust course heading 270. I'm clearing your path. Sol, you can't take that many fighters alone, Quan said. Fall back. Negative, sir. My shields are down, but my weapons work fine. And there are 3 civilian transports in their targeting path. I can stop the fighters or I can run, not both. Velthar watched the tactical display. The math was clear. Sol could escape if she left now. She could not survive if she engaged. She engaged. Sol's frigate tore into the fighter formation, weapons blazing. She destroyed 4 fighters in the first pass, 8 more on the second. Then a dozen Ravik ships surrounded her. Sol, eject, Hay shouted. Get to an escape pod. Pod's damaged, Sol replied. Her voice was still calm, but Velthar detected something underneath. Not fear. Something else. Determination. Listen, I need someone to do me a favor. My brother Bach is with the Marines on the Sol. Tell him I kept my promise. Everyone gets home. Her ship's reactor went critical. Sol aimed her dying frigate at the largest Ravik's vessel in the formation. The explosion took out 18 enemy ships. The command deck went silent. Then Quan spoke quietly. "Mark her for the highest honors. Send the message to Bok." Velthar found his translator making strange sounds. He realized he was trying to process an emotional response he did not have the capacity for. Humans called it grief. They felt it when one of their own died. Kixians did not grieve. Death was mathematically inevitable. Mourning was inefficient. But watching the human crew, Velthar understood that grief was not just sadness. It was also fuel. Sul's sacrifice made the others fight harder. Not for victory, for her. For what she died protecting. The battle raged for 3 more hours. Human ships fell one by one. Each death was recorded. Each name was spoken. And each loss made the survivors more determined. Finally, Hai announced, "Last civilian transport is clear. Evacuation complete. All civilians are safe." Quan nodded. "All ships, begin withdrawal. We're done here." The human fleet retreated in good order, covering each other, making sure every damaged ship had an escort. The Ravix did not pursue aggressively. They had learned that chasing human vessels meant walking into traps. When the fleet reached the rally point, Velthar reviewed the casualty reports. 15 human ships destroyed, 42 damaged. Crew losses, 15% of the total fleet personnel. By Sixian standards, this was catastrophic. Kixian doctrine called for retreat at 12% casualties. The humans had gone beyond acceptable losses and kept fighting. But they had also saved 43 billion lives. Velthar found Quan in the Memorial Bay that night. The captain stood in front of a wall where names were being engraved. Saul's name appeared among hundreds of others. "We lost good people today," Quan said without turning around. "You exceeded acceptable casualty thresholds," Velthar replied. "Kixian forces would have retreated hours earlier. Then Kixian forces would have abandoned those civilians. We would have saved more ships, more crew. The math is clear." Quan finally turned to face him. His eyes were red. Humans produced water from their eyes when experiencing strong emotions. Velthar had read about this but never witnessed it. "You're right," Quan said. "Your math is clear. You calculate survival. We calculate what's worth surviving for. Those aren't the same thing." Velthar processed this statement. It made no logical sense. Survival was the ultimate goal. Everything else was secondary. "Explain," he said. Quan gestured to the names on the wall. "Saul died today. By your math, that was a waste. One ship, one life, traded for temporary tactical advantage. But Saul died protecting 3 transport ships carrying 12,000 civilians. Those civilians lived because she fought. Their children will grow up. Their families will stay together. Saul knew the math. She chose the people instead. That is inefficient. That's human." Quan's hand touched Saul's name on the wall. "We fight inefficiently. We die protecting people who might not survive anyway. We take losses that pure logic says we shouldn't accept. And somehow, we win. Or at least, we save who we can." Velthar returned to his quarters and wrote his report. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The facts were clear. The humans had violated every principle of tactical warfare. They had exceeded casualty limits. They had made emotional decisions, and they had succeeded. He wrote, "Human forces engaged the Ravix swarm at the outer colonies. Despite catastrophic losses by Kixian standards, they achieved their objective. All civilian evacuations completed. Preliminary analysis suggests human inefficiency may be strategically relevant in scenarios where traditional doctrine fails. Further observation required." He deleted the last sentence 3 times before finally leaving it in the report. Outside his window, the human fleet regrouped. They prepared for the next battle. They mourned their dead. They refused to quit. And Velthar began to wonder if evolution had made a mistake somewhere along the way. The planet Terrace 4 burned. Velthar stood inside the transport ship and watched through the viewport as they descended through smoke and fire. The Ravix had taken this world 3 days ago. Intelligence reported 3,000 civilians trapped in the northern settlement. Coalition analysis. Impossible to rescue, acceptable to abandon. The humans did not accept this. 30 seconds to drop zone, the pilot announced. Her name was Ray, and she flew like she was dancing with death. Velthar turned to Colonel Bach, who commanded this mission. Bach was Saul's brother, the Marine who lost his sister in the first battle. His face showed no expression, but Velthar had learned to read human body language. The tight jaw, the controlled breathing, the way his hand rested on his weapon. Bach was carrying grief like armor. Colonel, the tactical analysis suggests a 97% chance of mission failure, Velthar said. Good thing we don't trust tactical analysis, Bach replied. Strap in, this is going to be rough. The ship hit atmosphere hard. Velthar's internal organs shifted in ways that evolution had not prepared him for. Around him, 50 human Marines checked their weapons and gear. None of them showed fear, or rather they all showed fear but worked through it anyway. Sergeant Hyun sat across from Velthar, cleaning his rifle. He was young, maybe 25 human years. First time in a combat drop, Ambassador? I am an observer, Velthar replied. I do not participate in combat. You will today, Hyun said with a slight smile. Down there, everyone fights or everyone dies. No middle ground. The ship shook as enemy fire hit the shields. Alarms blared. The pilot's voice stayed calm. Taking fire. Hold tight. They crashed, more than landed. The transport hit the ground, skidded 50 meters, and stopped with a screaming of metal. The back ramp dropped immediately. Move! 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 Bach shouted. The Marines poured out into hell. Velthar followed on shaking legs. Outside, the settlement was a war zone. Buildings burned. Bodies lay in the streets. Ravik's drones hunted through the ruins, killing anything that moved. In the distance, 3,000 civilians huddled in what remained of a reinforced shelter. Hyun, take your squad and secure the shelter entrance, Bach ordered. Nah, set up the defensive perimeter. You, establish a medical station. We hold this position until everyone is evacuated. The humans scattered, moving with purpose. Velthar stayed close to Bach, recording everything. This was why he came. To document human failure up close. The Raviks attacked immediately. Velthar had never been in ground combat before. Kixians fought wars with drones and long-range weapons. They did not put bodies on battlefields. It was inefficient, dangerous, and emotionally damaging. Humans apparently did not care. Sergeant Hyun led his squad toward the shelter. Ravik's drones emerged from the rubble, firing energy weapons. 2 Marines went down immediately. Hyun did not stop. He returned fire, destroyed 3 drones, and kept moving. One of the wounded Marines was Kixian, a soldier from Velthar's own homeworld, assigned to coalition forces. He screamed in pain, his leg torn by a plasma blast. Hyun turned back. Against all tactical sense, he went back for the wounded soldier. Hyun, leave him! Bach's voice came over the comm. Complete the mission. He's still alive, sir, Hyun replied. He grabbed the Kixian soldier and threw him over his shoulders. I'm not leaving anyone behind. Velthar watched in amazement as Hyun carried the wounded Kixian through enemy fire. The human sergeant took 2 hits to his armor. The impacts should have knocked him down. He stayed standing through pure will, running 6 kilometers while carrying a soldier that weighed nearly as much as he did. When they reached the shelter, Hyun collapsed. Medic Yu rushed over. I'm fine, Hyun gasped. Check him first. He pointed at the Kixian soldier. Velthar approached the wounded Kixian. The soldier looked up at him with all 4 eyes. The human saved me. I told him to leave me. I ordered him. He refused. Why? Velthar asked. The soldier made a sound that the translator interpreted as bitter laughter. He said, You're still alive, which means you still go home. Humans are insane. The battle continued for hours. Velthar watched humans do impossible things. Corporal Na held a defensive position alone when her squad was pinned down. She fired until her weapon overheated, then threw it away and used a broken piece of metal as a club. She fought 3 Ravix drones in close combat and won. When asked why she did not retreat, she said, "My squad needed time to reload, so I bought them time." Medic U set up a medical station in a partially collapsed building. Wounded soldiers came in a steady stream. Human, Kixian, even a few Vrelians. U treated them all equally. At one point, a wounded Ravix drone crawled into her station. U looked at it for a long moment. The drone was damaged, leaking fluids, but still alive, still dangerous. "Please don't," one of the wounded humans said. "That thing killed Johnson." U was quiet. Then she said, "It's still alive. It still feels pain. I took an oath." She treated the Ravix drone's wounds, even though her hands shook the whole time. Later, that same drone's distress signal brought Ravix forces away from the civilian evacuation route. U's mercy had accidentally created a tactical advantage. "You see," Bach said to Velthar, "we don't fight smart, we fight right. Sometimes those are the same thing." The hardest moment came when Engineer Da tried to maintain the shelter's shield generator. The generator was failing, damaged by Ravix bombardment. Without it, the civilians inside would be exposed to enemy fire. Da worked on the generator while energy blasts hit the shield above her head. Velthar watched her hands move with desperate speed, reconnecting circuits, rerouting power, doing things the manufacturer said were impossible. "It's not going to hold," someone shouted. "It'll hold," Da screamed back. She grabbed 2 power conduits with her bare hands, using her own body to complete the circuit. Electricity burned her. Velthar could smell cooking flesh. Da screamed in pain but did not let go. "I need 5 minutes," she shouted. "Give me 5 minutes and I'll have it stable." Bach looked at Velthar. "Your people built this generator. Can she really fix it like that?" Velthar calculated quickly. "No. What she is attempting is impossible. The power requirements alone—" Da's scream interrupted him. "Work, damn you, work! Those people need you to work!" The generator stabilized. Impossible, but true. Da had forced it to function through desperation and will, and refusing to accept failure. When the engineers pulled her away, her hands were ruined. She looked at them and laughed. "Still got fingers," she said. "Could be worse." It took 8 hours to evacuate all 3,000 civilians. The humans held the perimeter the entire time. They took casualties that would have broken a Kixian force. Marines died protecting people they had never met. Medics worked until they collapsed from exhaustion. Engineers kept systems running through sheer determination. When the last civilian transport lifted off, Bach counted his losses. 23 Marines dead. 42 wounded. By any military standard, unacceptable casualties. But 3,000 civilians lived. That night, Velthar sat in the camp while humans tended their wounded and mourned their dead. He found Bach standing guard, even though the colonel should have been resting. "We succeeded," Velthar said, "against all probability." "We did what needed doing," Bach replied. He was quiet for a moment. "My sister died in the first battle. Did you know that?" Lieutenant Sol. "Yes, I recorded her sacrifice. She made me promise something when we both joined the military. She made me promise that if I ever had to choose between following orders and saving people, I'd save the people. She said that's what being human means." Velthar thought about this. "Your sister violated orders to protect civilians. You violated tactical doctrine to rescue trapped colonists. This pattern of disobedience should result in military failure." "Should," Bach agreed. "But here we are, mission complete, people saved. Maybe your 'should' is wrong." Velthar watched Sergeant Hyun sleeping nearby, still wearing the Kixian soldier's blood on his armor. He watched Medic Yu treating her own burns with the same care she had given everyone else. He watched Engineer Da, hands wrapped in bandages, already studying schematics for the next repair. These humans fought inefficiently. They refused to accept acceptable losses. They violated doctrine, ignored probability, and made decisions based on emotion rather than logic. And somehow, they won. Velthar updated his report that night. His hands hesitated over the keyboard for long minutes before he wrote, "I have observed human ground combat. I have watched them fight, die, and sacrifice for civilians they do not know. I have seen them carry wounded enemies to safety. I have seen them hold impossible positions through nothing but will. Kixian doctrine says emotion is weakness. Human performance suggests this doctrine may be flawed. Recommendation: continue observation. Something important is happening here, something we do not understand. He sent the report and looked out at the human camp. They were singing. Even after losing 23 of their own, even with their wounds and their grief, they were singing around fires, telling stories about their fallen friends. Velthar's species had evolved past such rituals. They were inefficient. They served no tactical purpose. But watching the humans, Velthar wondered if maybe his species had evolved past something important. Something that made humans unbreakable. He just did not know what it was yet. But he was beginning to suspect. The threshold line was humanity's last joke with the universe. Velthar floated in his observation pod, watching the Coalition fleet assemble. Behind them, the core worlds of the galaxy, everything worth protecting. Ahead of them, empty space and the approaching Ravix swarm. 200 Ravix capital ships. 2 million fighter craft. The largest force ever recorded. Against them, 89 Coalition vessels. The math was simple. The Coalition would lose. All ships. This is Grand Tactician Zixtar, the voice came over the fleet channel. Evacuation protocols are now active. All non-essential personnel will depart for the core worlds. Military vessels will delay the enemy as long as possible before falling back. Estimated survival time, 4 hours. Estimated survival rate, 12%. Velthar listened to the Kixian tactician speak. Her voice was calm, logical, empty of emotion. She was doing her job, calculating the best possible outcome from an impossible situation. Then Admiral Tay's voice cut in. Grand Tactician, this is the human fleet. We're not evacuating. Silence. Admiral Tay, you do not understand, Zixtar said carefully. This is not a battle we can win. The math? We've seen your math, Tay interrupted. His voice was tired but firm. It says we lose. It says we run. It says we sacrifice the outer systems to save the core. We're not doing that. Then you choose death. We choose to fight, Captain Kwan's voice joined in. Maybe we lose. Probably we lose. But we're going to make them earn it. Every meter, every second, every single ship they want to kill, they're going to pay for. Velthar activated his comm to Kwan's flagship. He had been embedded with the humans for 3 months now. He needed to understand this insanity. Captain, I must speak with you. Minutes later, Velthar stood on Kwan's command deck. The captain looked older than when they first met. His eyes had deep circles. His uniform showed repair marks, but his back was straight. You cannot win this battle, Velthar said. Every calculation shows defeat. Why do you refuse to retreat? Kwan gestured to the view screen showing the Ravix fleet approaching. You see those ships? Yes. Each one of those ships was built by consuming star systems, eating planets, killing billions. The Ravix don't fight for resources or territory. They fight because that's all they do. Their hunger made metal. I know this. Then you know that retreating just delays the problem. They'll consume the outer systems, then the middle systems, then the core. Running doesn't save anyone. It just decides who dies first. Commander Hay stepped forward. We have a different plan. It's probably stupid, but it's the only plan that doesn't end with everyone dead. Explain, Velthar demanded. Hay pulled up a tactical display. The Ravix fight like a swarm. Perfect coordination, overwhelming numbers. They expect us to fight defensively, to preserve our ships, to retreat when casualties mount. That's what logic says to do. Correct. So we're going to do the opposite. Every ship, full attack. No defensive positions, no retreat. We're going to hit them so hard and so crazy that their perfect coordination breaks down. Velthar stared at the display. That is suicide. Yes, Kwan agreed, but it's suicide that gives everyone behind us a chance. And it's better than your plan, which is just slower suicide. The other coalition species will not support this insanity. Kwan smiled sadly. We'll see. The Ravix swarm arrived 2 hours later, Space became fire and metal. The Ravix opened with a coordinated bombardment that should have destroyed half the Coalition fleet in the first minute. But the human ships were already moving, scattering in patterns that made no tactical sense. "All human vessels, begin assault," Admiral Tay ordered. "Remember? We don't need to win. We just need to hurt them so bad they remember us." The human fleet charged directly at the Ravix swarm. Velthar watched in horror and fascination. This violated every principle of space combat. You did not attack a superior force head-on. You did not abandon defensive positions. You did not sacrifice formation integrity. The humans did all of it. Frigates loaded with explosives flew suicide runs into Ravix capital ships. Destroyers with failing shields used their last moments to ram enemy vessels. Fighter pilots flew into point-blank range, taking catastrophic damage to ensure their shots connected. "First wave complete," High reported. Her voice was steady despite the chaos. 26 ships lost, Ravix casualties, 73 capital ships, unknown number of fighters, Velthar recalculated. The humans had traded 26 vessels for 73 enemy ships. By any normal standard, this was a terrible exchange rate. But against overwhelming odds, it was working. The Ravix formation was fragmenting, confused by an enemy that did not retreat. Then Lieutenant Jin's voice came over the comm. "This is Jin on the destroyer Guangzhou. We've lost engines and our reactor is critical. Recommend you put us down as lost." Quan's face showed pain. "Jin, eject. Get your crew to the pods." "Negative, sir. We've still got working weapons and a dozen Ravix fighters approaching the medical ships. We're going to take care of that first." Velthar watched Jin's destroyer, powerless and dying, turn itself into a fixed weapons platform. The human lieutenant had lost his arm in the battle but remained at his post, tourniquet himself with his remaining hand while continuing to fire. Jin's ship destroyed 11 Ravix fighters before the reactor finally exploded. The battle raged for 3 hours. Velthar recorded everything, his processing power overwhelmed by trying to understand what he was witnessing. Pilot Ray guided her damaged fighter toward a Ravix engine core. Her cockpit breached and losing oxygen. She sang on the open channel as she flew, a lullaby she said her daughter liked. The singing stopped when she impacted. Medic Yu continued treating wounded in a medical bay that was falling apart, the ship breaking into pieces around her. She refused to evacuate, saying, "I still have patience." She died when the hull finally ruptured, but every patient she had been treating survived. Private Chan held a bulkhead closed with his bare hands for 12 minutes, while civilians evacuated through a damaged section. The metal crushed him when his strength finally failed, but every civilian made it through alive, and the other Coalition species watched. Velthar saw it happening on his sensors. Kixian ships that should have been retreating were holding position. Vrelian commanders were making emotional decisions instead of logical ones. A Kixian captain named Velkix broke formation to support a damaged human vessel, explaining to his shocked crew, "The humans do not abandon their own, neither will I." The infection of human irrationality was spreading. Admiral Tay's flagship took critical damage. The ship was dying, life support failing, but the admiral refused to transfer his flag to another vessel. "All ships, this is Tai. We're going to try something probably insane. If it works, it might break their command structure. If it doesn't, well, it was an honor serving with you." Tay aimed his dying flagship at the largest Ravix command vessel and accelerated. Not with engines. Those were gone. But with emergency thrusters, life support power, anything that could generate thrust. The ship moved like a wounded animal, slow but determined. The Ravix poured fire into Tay's flagship. The vessel came apart piece by piece, but Tay kept it moving forward. When the bridge was breached, he sealed himself in the command chair and continued manual control. Captain Quan's voice came over the channel. "Admiral, eject, please." "Can't do that, Captain. Ship responds to my commands only. Someone has to fly her in." Tay's voice was calm. "Besides, I've got a wife waiting for me somewhere. I'd like to arrive with a good story." Tay's flagship hit the Ravix command vessel at full momentum. The explosion destroyed both ships and created a shockwave that disabled a dozen nearby Ravix vessels. The Ravik swarm, for the first time in recorded history, hesitated. They had evolved to fight logical enemies. Enemies that calculated losses and retreated when probability demanded. They had no experience with enemies that simply refused to lose. The hesitation lasted only seconds. But in those seconds, the coalition fleet struck with everything they had. The battle turned into chaos. Ships from a dozen species fought with abandon, protecting each other, sacrificing for strangers, doing things logic said they should not do. Velthar found himself making sounds his translator could not interpret. He was experiencing something his species had evolved past. Watching beings die for principles instead of survival. Witnessing sacrifice made meaningful by choice rather than calculation. He was feeling emotion. When the battle ended, the Ravik swarm broke. Not destroyed, but fragmented. Confused. Unable to coordinate against an enemy that fought with emotion instead of tactics. The coalition had lost 62 ships. 62% casualties. By any military standard, catastrophic. But the Raviks had lost more. And more importantly, they had learned fear. Velthar floated in his observation pod and processed what he had witnessed. Humans had died in numbers that should have broken them. Instead, they had broken the enemy. He began writing his report, but his hand stopped over the keyboard. Everything he believed was wrong. Evolution had not made his species stronger by removing emotion. It had made them fragile, efficient but breakable. Humans kept their emotions and weaponized them. Fear made them faster. Anger made them deadly. Love made them sacrifice. Grief made them relentless. And determination, pure, illogical, impossible determination, made them unbreakable. Velthar wrote 3 words in his report before stopping. We were hopeless. He looked at those words for a long time before continuing. 3 months after the Battle of Threshold Line, Velthar stood before the Kixian Grand Council and told them the truth they did not want to hear. The council chamber was massive, built to hold the greatest minds of his species. 12 Grand Councilors sat in a semicircle, their 4 eyes focused on him. These were the beings who had guided Kixian civilization for 10,000 years. They had evolved past emotion, perfected logic, and built a society based on pure reason. Velthar was about to tell them they were wrong. Ambassador Velthar, the first counselor spoke, her voice modulated to perfect neutrality. You have observed human military operations for 6 months. Present your findings. Velthar activated his presentation. Numbers and charts filled the air, casualty rates, tactical analyses, battle recordings. The data told a clear story. Humans suffer casualties at rates we consider catastrophic, Velthar began. They violate tactical doctrine. They make decisions based on emotion rather than calculation. By every metric we use to measure military effectiveness, they should fail. The counselors made sounds of agreement. This confirmed what they already believed. However, Velthar continued, they do not fail. In fact, they succeed where we would fail. They hold positions we would abandon. They save people we would classify as acceptable losses. They win battles we would never fight. Luck, the third counselor said. Random probability favoring irrational action. It is not sustainable. I thought so too, Velthar replied. For the first month, I recorded their failures and waited for mathematics to prove them wrong. But mathematics did not prove them wrong. They did. He showed recordings from the battles. Lieutenant Sol sacrificing her ship. Sergeant Hyun carrying a wounded Kixian soldier. Engineer Da forcing a generator to work through sheer will. Admiral Tay ramming his flagship into the enemy command vessel. These actions violate logical doctrine, Velthar said. They reduce overall survival probability. They prioritize emotion over efficiency, and yet they win. You are suggesting emotion is superior to logic? The first counselor asked. Her tone suggested this was impossible. No, Velthar said carefully. I am suggesting that we have misunderstood what evolution selected for. We believed evolution meant removing weakness. Humans show us that evolution means survival. And survival sometimes requires what we call weakness. He pulled up his final analysis. For 3 millennia, We have built our civilization on logic. We calculate optimal outcomes. We accept acceptable losses. We retreat when probability demands. This makes us efficient, but it also makes us fragile. Explain fragility, the second counselor demanded. We know when to quit, Velthar said simply. Humans do not. When faced with impossible odds, we calculate the probability of failure and withdraw. Humans calculate the cost of not trying and attack anyway. This is why they survived the Ravix swarm. He showed the final battle statistics. The Ravix had every advantage: numbers, firepower, coordination. They should have won in hours. Instead, they broke against human determination. The Ravix evolved to fight logical enemies, Velthar explained. Enemies who retreat when mathematics demands. Humans refused to retreat. They fought past the point where we would have fled, past the point where they should have died. They fought until the Ravix, who cannot feel fear, learned something close to it. The council chamber was silent. Velthar continued. I have spent 6 months trying to understand human combat effectiveness. I have analyzed their tactics, studied their psychology, calculated their probability curves. And I have reached a conclusion that troubles me deeply. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. We evolved wrong. The chamber erupted in objections. Velthar waited for silence before continuing. We evolved to be efficient. We removed fear, so we make optimal retreat calculations. We removed anger, so we fight with perfect control. We removed love, so we protect assets logically. We removed grief, so we move forward from losses quickly. We believed this made us superior. It does, the first counselor insisted. Does it? Velthar asked. When the Ravix came, our calculations told us to abandon 19 star systems, 43 billion lives, acceptable losses. Humans looked at the same calculations and said no. They fought for those systems. They saved those lives. They did it by refusing to accept our math. He showed more recordings. Humans fighting with tears on their faces. Humans screaming in rage as they charged impossible odds. Humans dying while protecting strangers they had never met. Humans weaponize emotion, Velthar said. Fear makes them faster. Anger makes them deadly. Love makes them sacrifice. Grief makes them relentless. Every emotion we evolved past, they turned into a tool for survival. Inefficient tools, the third counselor argued. Perhaps, Velthar agreed, but effective ones. A human soldier will fight past the point where a Keeksian would retreat. A human medic will treat wounded enemies we would leave to die. A human engineer will make impossible repairs because they refuse to accept failure. He pulled up his most controversial data. I have calculated the survival rates for coalition species in combat. Keeksians. Highest efficiency, lowest casualties, moderate success rate. Humans. Lowest efficiency, highest casualties, highest success rate. We survive battles better. They survive wars better. The first counselor stood. This is absurd. You are suggesting that primitive emotional responses are superior to evolved logical thought. No, Velthar said quietly. I am suggesting that we mistook evolution for perfection. We evolved to be safe. Humans evolved to be dangerous. When facing an existential threat, dangerous survives. He showed his final piece of evidence. A graph comparing coalition species survival rates across history. Every advanced species showed the same pattern. Initial success, then slow decline, then eventual absorption into the coalition for protection. Every primitive species showed different patterns: chaos, conflict, but persistent survival. We evolved past the traits that make survival possible in extreme conditions, Velthar said. We became too logical to sacrifice, too efficient to be desperate, too calculated to be determined. Humans never evolved past those traits. This is why they will outlive us. The council rejected his findings. They called his data flawed. They questioned his objectivity. They ordered him to revise his conclusions. Velthar refused. That night, alone in his quarters, he wrote his final report. Not for the council, for himself, for truth. I titled this report, Seeing humans fight made me see that we were hopeless, because I have finally understood what that means. We, the Sixian, the evolved species, the logical ones, we are hopeless. Not because we are weak, because we are too perfect. We perfected logic and lost desperation. We perfected efficiency and lost determination. We perfected calculation and lost the ability to fight for what cannot be calculated. Humans are messy. They cry during combat. They make irrational choices. They sacrifice optimal outcomes for emotional reasons. They refuse to accept mathematical reality. And they survive. I have watched them fight. I have seen them die. I have recorded their losses and their victories. And I have learned something that terrifies me. If another threat comes, one that requires sacrifice beyond calculation, courage beyond logic, determination beyond probability, the humans will survive. We will not, because we evolved past survival. We evolved into safety, and safety is not the same as strength. Humans evolved dangerous. They kept their fear, their anger, their love, their grief. They weaponized emotion. They turned irrationality into advantage. They refused to accept defeat even when mathematics demands it. This is why they will outlive every species that advanced past emotions. This is why they will inherit the galaxy when more efficient species fall, not because they are superior, because they are too stubborn to accept inferiority. I no longer believe in evolution as progress. I believe in evolution as survival. And by that measure, humans are the most evolved species in the coalition. We are the primitive ones. We just do not realize it yet. Velthar sent his report to the classified archives where it would never be read by the council. Then he made a decision that surprised himself. He requested permanent assignment to human forces. Years passed. A new threat emerged at the galactic border. The Coalition Council convened. The Grand Tactician began calculating evacuation routes and acceptable losses. Velthar stood in the council chamber, now older and carrying scars from battles he had not expected to survive. Beside him stood Admiral Quan, promoted after Admiral Tay's sacrifice. "The calculations are clear," the Grand Tactician said. "We must evacuate 15 million colonists." "The math shows." "How many people need saving?" Quan interrupted. The chamber went silent at the improper question. 15 million, the Grand Tactician repeated. "Then we save 15 million, Quan said simply. "Anyone coming with us?" Velthar watched the council. He saw Kixian councilors hesitate, calculating probability. He saw them struggle with the safe choice versus the right choice. Then Velthar stood. For the first time in his species' history, a Kixian made an emotional choice in the council chamber. "I will go," he said. The first councilor looked at him. "Ambassador, the probability of success." "I do not care about probability," Velthar interrupted. "I care about 15 million lives. I have learned from humans that these are not the same concern." One by one, other counselors stood. Not because math told them to, because they had learned something from watching humans fight. Sometimes the irrational choice is the only rational one. Sometimes refusing to calculate defeat is the only path to victory. Sometimes evolution means going backward to go forward. As the fleet prepared to launch, Velthar stood beside Quan and looked at the stars. "You changed us," Velthar said quietly. "We just showed you what you forgot," Quan replied. "Your species evolved past emotion and became efficient. Ours kept emotion and stayed dangerous. You're not hopeless. You just needed to remember how to be scared, angry, loving, and determined again." Velthar thought about his report from years ago, about how seeing humans fight had made him see that his species was hopeless. He had been wrong about the conclusion, but right about the observation. They were not hopeless. They were just sleeping, and humans had woken them up. The fleet launched toward impossible odds. Velthar felt something he had not experienced in his entire life. Fear. Real fear. The kind that made you faster, sharper, more alive. He realized he was smiling. Kixians did not smile. But he was learning. Humans had taught the galaxy that evolution was not about perfection. It was about survival. And survival required being willing to fight, to sacrifice, to refuse defeat even when math said you should quit. The galaxy was learning to be human, not in biology, but in spirit. And maybe, Velthar thought, that was the only evolution that ever mattered. Hope was not a strategy, but it was the only strategy that never surrendered. And in the end, that made all the difference.